Hey, kia ora, Helen Brahms here. How are you doing? Hope you're all having a super fantastic sparkling day. Oh, I get to do another live video today. Yay! Today is day 3 of our 5-day challenge. And how many times do you have to tell Facebook you got something? Anyway, uh, so we're on day 3 of a 5-day challenge. And our challenge today is, what is our favorite quote and why? So I have a huge document full of favorite quotes. I even have a folder full of quotes that I've created into memes. I have so many favorite quotes, and I thought, what one can I pick to share with you? And the one that's resonating with me right now is, as a genealogist, we come across some very strange stories. And you read them and you go, is this really true? And it reminds me of Mark Twain's quote, which is, it's no wonder that truth is stranger than fiction. Fiction has to make sense. And I stopped and I thought about it and I thought, you know, he's right. Fiction does have to make sense because people wouldn't read it otherwise. I mean, even if it's a fantasy story or a sci-fi story, it doesn't matter what, a Western story, it doesn't matter what genre it is, fiction has to make sense. And if you think about all of these movies out there that are based on true events, you think about it and you go, wow, that was a really cool story. But when you actually find out the real full story behind it, you're like, that was crazy. There's no way that could be true. But truth really is stranger than fiction. And in genealogy, we come across crazy stories all the time about how, some guy was walking down the street, according to a newspaper article, this relative was walking down the street. He got assaulted and ended up dying later on. And then all these other things started. And because of his death, all these other things started happening. It's sort of like, whoa. One client that I was researching, her fifth great grandmother was kidnapped by Indians and was gone for almost 20 years. And when she comes home, she found out her husband had left a few days beforehand because he finally found out where she was. And, the baby that was in the cradle when she left is now a young man. And so she sets off in search of her husband to catch up with him to say, hey, I'm home, I'm okay. And comes across this funeral that's happening in this little village. And so she goes over there to find out the guy in the grave is her husband, who died the day before from a fever he had been in for the last 4 days. Crazy stories, crazy, I tell you. And when you go through some of the history stuff and you're reading the actual facts of these stories in history, you're like, no way. But when you read a fiction book, you feel a little more comfortable because it's sort of like, yeah, okay, I can see how this happens, and they follow a logical process. Life doesn't follow logic at times. Life just takes off and goes in all sorts of different directions, and it's like, this is so crazy. And it's almost like saying, it's so crazy it has to be true. There's no way that that story could not happen, because truth is stranger than fiction after all. But think about, times in history. Think about those family stories that you get told at family reunions, at family meals, and all of that sort of stuff. When the family gets together and those old family stories start coming up, how true are those family stories? Well, that's one thing that genealogists can help you uncover, is that we actually go in there and we dig deep and we find the truth behind these stories. And some of them just really just don't make sense. You're sort of like, well, how could that happen? Why did it take so long? And then, you're thinking in today's terms. You have to put yourself back in time as to what living conditions did they have at the time, what was happening in the country at the time, what other events were taking place at the time. Like this fifth great grandmother that got kidnapped was back in the 1700s. Her husband was away at war and he came home a year after she'd been kidnapped. As she's leaving, the report that I read, as she was leaving, it said that her baby was in the cradle. She could hear him crying as she left. She comes back later on. Here's this young 18, 19, 20-year-old man standing in front of her. That was that baby in the cradle. So, like, she's missed basically his entire childhood, his teenage years, watching him grow into a young man. Her husband came home a year after she had been kidnapped and started looking for her. And it took him almost 20 years to figure out where she was. He finally found out where she was. And you think, why did it take so long? Look at the times they're living in, late 1700s. We didn't have a telephone. We didn't have the internet at that time. I know that's going to blow some people's mind. There was times before the internet and before computers and before telephones where messages were carried by runners, people on horseback. You know, they were hand delivered. Mail was hand delivered. So you're sending out inquiries and stuff. You've now got to wait for those inquiries to come back. I actually started doing genealogy research with my mum before the internet. So we would have to write letters to family associations, family history associations in England for a particular area to find the information that we wanted, and then we would have to wait for their reply to come back. It could take 6 to 8 weeks to get a reply, sometimes longer. And you know, it's out there. You have times beforehand. Doing genealogy prior to computers was a lot of groundwork, a lot of legwork, a lot of sitting around and waiting, a lot of time spent in libraries researching and stuff. We still do that today, but now we do have the internet that helps us a little more because we can now email and not have to wait 6 to 8 weeks for a reply to come. We might have to wait for the certificates for that long for them to come, for requesting copies of certificates. But look at all the stories that take place in your family. Which ones are true? Which ones are not true? And go out there and do a little digging around to see just how true is that story, or has it been fictionalized a little bit just to make it a little more believable or to have it make sense? So remember that. It's no wonder that truth is stranger than fiction. Fiction has to make sense. Any fictional book you read will follow a logical pattern. There is always a pattern to a book. I read like what do they call them, nickel and dime romance. I read them at night because it helps shut my brain down. It's the same pattern. Boy meets girl, fall in love, break up, get back together. End of book. Done. The names change, the situations change, but the pattern through the book is always the same. If you look at any mystery book, you have the mystery takes, the crime happens, and then the people who are involved with the crime start investigating. Now, you may or may not see um, the point of view from the person who committed the crime to see how they're following along the investigation. But you have the investigation taking place, and usually something may happen to the main person that is investigating, and then they get rescued and they find the killer or the thief or whatever. The big confession is made, and that's the end of the story. Sometimes there's a little few twists and turns in there. I like those twisty turny ones. Action books, they're the same things. There's always a lot of action in them, but it makes logical sense. There's a logical process through every fictional story that you read. Yes, they do change up a little bit by putting a twist in there. And if you know your author very well, you know they will put that twist in there. But the fiction books make sense. Even if it's fantasy, if it's sci-fi, if it's futuristic stories, if it's ones from in the past, they always make sense. Truth does not always make sense. It does not follow any logical patterns. It just happens. So what I would like to know from you guys, because I'm wrapping this up now, what I'd like to know from you guys is, what is your favorite quote and why? Please leave it in the comments below, because I'm always looking to add quotes to my bank of quotes. But I'd like to know what some of your favorite quotes are and why they are your favorites. But always remember, no matter it's, that Mark Twain once said, it's no wonder that truth is stranger than fiction. Fiction has to make sense. Have a super fantastic sparkling day, and we will catch you guys later on today. Hei konara.